I do believe that will happen. But what you're seeing right now, though, is not just the corroding of trust towards the presidency and damage on the presidency that's going to take years to replace, but also other cabinet agencies, other cabinet heads, other people who have always understood that their responsibility is to the American people first. And then you see a clip like this of Mike Pompeo lying through his teeth to reporters on ABC and then at the United Nations. Take a look at this clip.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that President Trump pressed the president of Ukraine 8 times to work with Rudy Giuliani to investigate Joe Biden's son. What do you know about those conversations?
So you just gave me a report about a high-seek whistleblower campaign, none of which I've seen.
Are you confident that none of your staff, that you or none of your staff did anything improper in this whole situation? Thank you.
So, Matt, I haven't had a chance to actually read the whistleblower complaint yet. I read the first couple of paragraphs and then got busy today. But I'll ultimately get a chance to see it. If I understand it right, it's from someone who had secondhand knowledge. To the best of my knowledge, and from what I've seen so far, each of the actions that were undertaken by State Department officials was entirely appropriate.
Mike Barnicle, that guy went to West Point.
My Lord.
That guy went to West Point. What a thug. He's acting like a common thug. He's lying about our country. He was in on a call that he knows crossed every line of propriety, that he was taught that at West Point, and he's behaving like a thug. Now he's behaving like a thug in trying to basically tell Congress that he can do whatever he wants to do and not to reach out to anybody at the State Department. It's as if he's adopted Donald Trump's view of the Constitution, that the Second Amendment gives the executive branch unlimited power. Let me say it again. This guy went to West Point. He knows better, and he's acting like a common criminal. He's acting like a thug. He's lying through his teeth. He's shaming himself. He's shaming State Department employees, and he's shaming the United States of America.
Well,
he has no excuse.
That first clip, Joe, with Martha, in which he garbles his response and seems struck by surprise at the question, all you can think of is duty, honor, country. West Point. That's the oath he took upon graduation, and he was there. Is a simple answer to that question is, I was on the call. The president did nothing wrong. He's had that opportunity several times prior to being caught in this, but he did not and has not done it.
Mike, do you remember early on he was throwing Rudy Giuliani under the bus? And everybody was putting out, leaking to the press, said, oh, Pompeo didn't know anything about this. It was Giuliani acting on his own. And that's when poor Rudy, all confused and dazed late at night, held up his cell phone on a show and said, I got the text. Look at these texts.
Oh, my God.
And so then Volker gets fired. I mean, he's been scrambling and trying to cover up. I mean, I don't know that it's possible, but he's actually made this administration look even worse with his lies.
Joe, you know, Richard Haas has a great book, A World in Disarray, that we've talked about here many, many times. The book could actually be retitled A Nation in Disarray. And sadly, it's our nation, because we have constitutional officers, the Attorney General of the United States, the Secretary of State of the United States, behaving badly, perhaps even corruptly in this instance. And the government is led by a verbal arsonist who takes to the field each and every day, inciting people and inflaming an already volatile situation. These are sad times.
And I will say, Mika, I know Donald Trump is causing extraordinary damage to this republic,
yes,
to our constitutional norms, to our political norms, just to the way everybody treats each other. I mean, my gosh, yesterday Jimmy Carter turned 95. What a good man. Whether I agreed with him politically or not on so many things, a good Man, how we need a good man like that in the White House again.
Yep.
Sometime soon. But, you know, Donald Trump is ignorant of the Constitution. He is ignorant of history. He is ignorant of the political norms that have shaped this great republic for the past 240 years. Mike Pompeo, though, he studied it.
Yeah.
He understands it. He knows it. And yet he is willfully, every day of his life, in pursuit of power, corrupting that. And he is undercutting everything that he was taught at West Point. It is disgraceful.
Pretty confident the truth is going to come out at this point. Still ahead on Morning Joe, the president's lawyer gets a lawyer. Will Rudy Giuliani's new attorney advise his client to get off TV? You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
I had a couple of talks with civil rights lawyers and a constitutional lawyer today, and here's what they're recommending: that we should bring a lawsuit on behalf of the president and several of the people in the administration, maybe even myself as a lawyer, against the members of Congress individually for violating constitutional rights, violating civil rights. They're doing extraordinary things.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.